Good morning, it's Dr. Rutledge. I'm going to talk to you today about getting better. Let's get better. See if you like this one. This is, I hope, one of my favorites. So I'm happy to announce that I'm working with Dr. Elan in San Diego and Tijuana offices, our International Center for Laparoscopic Obesity Surgery, and we offer the MGB with the original technique, sleeve, and our new MGB2. So if you're interested, don't hesitate to contact us. My topic today is a little bit unusual before we get into the meat of the topic. And so I'm going to start off by saying aging and illness, a decline of healthy tissues and organ function. And maybe we could say all of us are in a search for rejuvenating interventions to delay or reverse both aging as well as the onset of decline and disease. We'd like to extend our health span. That's not just lifespan, but it's a long, healthy life, not just longer life. We don't want to, most of us don't want to live long time and be disabled or in a nursing home. So that's our goal. And I think the topic today will help us all reach that. So that's a pretty lofty goal for our presentation today, but I hope we'll reach that. My big topic today, even though I'm a surgeon, is we're going to talk about a chemical. So you might remember this from high school chemistry, but this is one particular chemical that's an amino acid. It's an essential amino acid, so we need it, but I'm also going to kind of villainize too much methionine. So diet and a longer life, what's that got to do with methionine? So that's our talk today. That's a summary. And again, diet and a longer life, methionine, and again, just to show you a little bit about the molecule. So our hypothesis is that if you eat more methionine from your food, it will do something called DNA methylation. Okay, what that means is this part of the molecule, this essential amino acid, will break off part of this and attach it to our DNA. And what they've shown is if you have less of that, you live longer and you're healthier. If you have more methylation of the DNA, it shows you're getting older, you'll have more disease, it'll shorten your lifespan and ultimately lead to an earlier death. And we're going to talk about all that today because that's a mouthful. But this little chemical, and we're going to tell you where that lives in your diet, and this part of the chemical is released. And this yellow thing, we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's the molecule sulfur. It's yellow in this model. And it'll help us know where we've got this kind of methionine because when it begins to rot, it stinks because of the sulfur in it. So we'll talk a lot about those things, but the idea is we want a healthier, longer life. And of course, we want to be thinner and less ill. And our hypothesis, we're going to talk about some of the research today, which shows that if you have more methionine in your diet, you take this part of the molecule and you attach it to the DNA, and more of that as it happens over life, you get more disease and you shorten the life of animals in studies and also in people. Pretty interesting. I mean, wouldn't everybody like to live a little longer? What do we want? And this like used to be a cheer in my high school football team, right? We go, what do we want? You know, a longer, healthier, happier life. The solution, my hypothesis we're going to talk about today, is simple. We can identify one chemical in the diet that can be easily avoided, that can lengthen life, and according to numerous studies now, decrease the risk of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and maybe obesity. Okay, now that's a pretty good deal, right? Okay, stay with me. DNA. So a question is, what's our DNA? The DNA is the code that makes every cell in us work every day. And why do we sicken, age, and die? What if simply we could age less rapidly, heal damaged DNA, and live a longer, healthier life? We live, we breathe, and we have our being only so far as our DNA remains clean, perfect, and undamaged. And as it gets so-called dirtier or imperfect or more damaged, then we begin to deteriorate. You know, you can tell the difference between a young, healthy 20-year-old like me or older people. And so what we want to do is how can we avoid this getting worse, or could we even maybe nudge it backwards a little bit? And we have an idea today based on a lot of new research that I thought you'd be interested in hearing. Again, what's DNA? Deoxyribonucleic acid. It's truly the miracle of life. You know, this is the double helix. And what is DNA? The short answer, DNA carries everything that we are. It's how we look and function. It's in every cell, every living thing. DNA is found in the structures of the cells called chromosomes. Okay, and so it's hard to tell you all the details, but you might remember this from high school. And this is a more complex version because this is coded on the outside. But these things are called histones. They're part of this DNA cycle. And then here's this little guy. See this red guy? Methionine. That's methionine stuck on DNA, on the epigenome, the outer coating, and the DNA itself. And that's called methylation because you put the methyl on the DNA. And as you methylate, that's good in some cases, but as it increases, it damages and ultimately kills the animal. So we want to talk about methyl and where we get it, which is from methionine, which actually comes from our diet. So stick with us today. I think you'll find this interesting. So life and death, young and old. Death by methylation. That's what we're talking about today. The animal amino acid, methionine. Methionine increases, methionine in the diet increases methylation, and less methionine, or what we're going to talk about called methionine restriction, shows that you get animals with a longer, healthier life. And in humans, when they show more methionine, methylation, they show a shorter lifespan and even the prediction of upcoming death. So the rather wild claim today is you don't want to die, eat a healthy diet, which is low in methionine. And we'll talk about how to do that because it's pretty easy. Okay, again, the hypothesis, the beneficial effects of plant protein, oh, I know you were going to hear that, is beneficial because of the difference in the protein amino acids. And we'll talk a little bit about it. But plant-based diets have reduced levels of methionine compared to animals. Consuming a vegan diet reduces plasma methionine compared to eating a meat, dairy, and eggs or animal-related diet. So the level of methionine has profound effects on health and longevity, not only in animals, but also in humans. So that's what we want to talk about today. Let me see if I can convince you. If you are eating a hamburger right now at McDonald's, maybe you'll want to hang up because I might interfere with your lunch. Again, we're talking about this methyl group, which is on the methionine molecule. And as we talked about, we gave away the story earlier. We said, oh, you know what? It's in meat. Here's another example of what's going on. Cytosine, this is a molecule which is part of the DNA structure. Okay, remember it has 4 base pairs, and these make up that helix. Okay, what happens is this gets methylated. The cytosine turns into 5-methylcytosine. Some of that's okay, but as it goes up, then we get illness and death. And so that's what we're talking about. Where does this happen? Where does it come from? Why we don't want it? And what the research shows in animals and people. So here's another complicated way. Remember, DNA is more than just those little balls and sticks we learned about. Here's another way of talking about DNA, and there's different parts of it. DNA repeats, there's promoter sections, the gene body, DNA repeats and stops and starts. And in other words, to run a whole human being, for example, or to run a mouse or a plant, you need a lot of DNA, and it has to be fairly complex. So if we just look at this, there's not so much to understand all of it, but just this complex structure is made as a model of DNA. And what we show here is really simple. The white is unmethylated, okay? That's without that methyl group. So if we think about it, this is more like with the DNA we find in young people, young animals, young yeast, young fruit flies, all of the newborn animals, plants have this kind of clean, scrubbed, white looking DNA. On the other hand, over time, it can get methylated. And so what happens here, we see these black dots coming in, and as the black dots come in, that is methylated DNA. And as the methylation occurs, the animal is older looking and ultimately dies. So what we want is clean and not the methylated versions. Again, this is a simple kind of, okay, this is me, happy, young, middle-aged, losing a little hair, few wrinkles, and old. And these are methyl groups. So it's really simple, good, bad. Why? Methylation equals aging. And we'll talk more about that. So here's another example. Here's methyl groups. And this methyl groups are beginning to damage and destroy the elderly person because it goes from clean, good to elderly, sick, and abnormal chromatin. Again, simple, which is we don't want the clock to go faster, we want it to go slower. So what we want to do is slow aging by having fewer methylations on DNA. We can do that, and it's simple. We'll talk about that. All right, now here's another couple of studies, and they show more methylation of the DNA happens the more you age. As you get older, more methylation. In fact, it happens so clearly, so absolutely, that as this happens, we can predict death. In other words, you don't want to be here because these people are just about done. Okay? It doesn't mean you have to die. Well, I guess all of us have to die someday. But what this means is if you could stay down here, you could keep going. But once you go up here, this is the end of things and you have to go visit your maker, you know? So we like to stay with our methyl groups down here because up here is the end of life for yeast, rats, bats, cats, everywhere they've tested this. Once you get this much methylation, the animal looks bad, feels bad, is diseased, and begins to die. We don't want to be here. This is methylation. Same thing, another study, chronological age. As the animals get older, they begin to die because they get this much methyl. When this much methylation occurs, death occurs. But not just that, the other warning signs of death. They lose their movement. They are not as intelligent. They begin to lose their memory. They begin to do all the things that we know that go along with aging and we don't want. And they are related to methylation. I'm going to do this a couple more times. More and more studies there. If you want to Google this, and you should, you know, don't listen to some goofball on the internet. I mean, I've looked on the internet. It's scary out there. But basically, as you have more methylation in this animal study, as well as others, then you see more of the damage, and they're not dots beyond this because you start dying, okay? This is where the dots come from. And what we want is, we want to keep our methyl groups down in this range and ideally go back to when we were kids. I don't think that's possible, at least not that I know of. Again, what's the problem? The problem is this methyl group and this chemical, which has the sulfur amino acid. This is methionine. It has a methyl donor, which this pops off and attaches to your DNA. You don't want that. Well, you want some of it, but you don't want too much. Too much is aging. You are still the same person, but as these go up, your all the other measures of aging go up. We don't want that. We want to cut them back or at least not keep them going up. Okay, what we know, calorie restriction. So let's talk about that. We know that we can make people, animals, rats, bats, live a longer, healthier life if we just cut back on how much they eat. But you have to cut back a lot. And most people can't do it. And also it has some side effects. You look pretty skinny. And so it can be a little sketchy, but calorie restriction, we know gets a longer life, but short, it's hard to do. But here's the question. What if we just give the animals less methyl groups? That is less methionine. So this is a big area of research. Make sure you Google this because you say a lot of the things that I'm going to say today are going to sound kind of crazy. No comment. All right. So, but methionine restriction. So if we saw those other graphs, what if we just cut back the amount of methionine in animals' diets? Not their whole diet. They could still eat a lot. Well, don't stuff yourself, but you could still eat more than calorie restriction. But could we get the same kind of benefit by just cutting out the methionine? The answer, yes. So let's stick on and we'll see it. Again, methionine restriction changes metabolic flexibility. It increases energy in the cells. It improves glucose tolerance. And what we're talking about today, the animals live longer in every study. Less sulfur, less methyl groups. I'll move that over here. Means that you live longer. Yep, maybe that's not a good place. Maybe I'll just go away. There we go. Okay. Changes in methylation of DNA due to methionine restriction changes the microRNAs, which is a bunch of other measures of how our body works. There's a whole batch of other chemical explanations, but basically, when you have methionine restriction, humans and animals live longer. Okay, mTOR is a really important protein. If we decrease it, people and animals live longer, and protein restriction decreases mTOR. This is a big deal. Okay, what happens to the animals and people who eat less methionine? They improve insulin sensitivity, they burn fat, they metabolize fatty acids out of the liver, and they decrease a chemical called glutathione peroxidase. Okay. Another part of aging is old cells build up. Okay, so old cells build up like junk around the house. I don't know if you've been to your grandma or grandpa's house and you go, whoa, you need to clean out some of this old junk. And it turns out your body has a natural method of cleaning out the old junk. And that old method of cleaning out dead cells, and junk and stuff from the past and putting in new skin cells and new eye and brain cells is called autophagy, which means autophagy means to eat. It means it eats some of the old junk, metabolizes and cleans out the house. Okay, so we actually want for an aging person to have more autophagy, because what happens in aging animals and people is what over time they build up old cells, old junk, old stuff in the house. And what we'd like to do is go ahead and clean it out. One way we can do that, here we talk about, is you could fast. Okay, so you might have heard about fasting is good. Yeah, well, why doesn't everybody do it? A little hard. We like to eat, right? Okay, fasting helps autophagy because when there's less calories, the body goes around and starts cleaning up the house, which is a good thing. Okay, that's good. On the other hand, it's hard, but we want to clean up the old cells because when we clean out the old cells, the body goes to the stem cells and puts out new cells. So you look better, you are healthier. You clean out the old junk and new cells are created. But if you're constantly eating all the time, what it turns out is we don't do as much autophagy and we age and die, okay? On the other hand, what they've shown with methionine restriction is you get the same autophagy as you do from a prolonged fast because methionine interferes with autophagy. So we get borderline cells signal that they're old. There's decreased energy to borderline old cells and the body acts to destroy the aging cells, autophagy, but not because of a prolonged fast, because you ate less methionine. Cool. Same thing, again, methionine restriction is more autophagy because you turn off the mTOR pathway. It's a lot of stuff. And anyways, the stem cells then step forward and differentiate into new, young, healthy cells. That means this gives longevity. This, with the TOR activated through methionine in your diet, means you get more aging. Okay, so less methionine good, more methionine bad. Where do you get methionine in your diet? Beef, chicken, seafood, pork, dairy, eggs, nuts and seeds, legumes, pasta. Oh, vegetables and fruit. Hello? Hello? How do you live longer? Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. Very low amounts of methionine in fruits and vegetables. Not much in grains and a little bit in beans, but we don't usually eat tons of seeds. So, but we do eat a lot of eggs and pork and poultry and beef. That's where you get most of your methionine in your diet. So cut it out. It doesn't mean you can't have it ever, but you want to look young and healthy. You want to get rid of the illnesses and problems that you've got, decrease inflammation, less methionine. Simple. Less methionine, more fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, right? Simple. Now, it used to be that people would criticize vegetable protein. They say, oh, that's bad. That's bad because it doesn't have much methionine. Well, now we know, no, it's not bad. It's good. Here's another study. Look at the amount of methionine in different foods. So tuna, salmon, eggs, beef, milk versus black beans, bread, carrots. I'm not sure what that is. Or how about an apple? Okay, an apple a day keeps your methionine away. Okay, so again, these are several different studies, different in mice and rats and all kinds of things. When they changed one thing, they cut back methionine, they increased lifespan, and this was just cutting back to 20% of the methionine they were giving the other animals. So you don't have to cut out everything. Okay, so this used to be said, a common misconception about proteins said, oh, plant protein's bad. It doesn't have much methionine. And it also, there's another whole lecture on branched chain amino acids, but plant protein is better for you because you're healthier. So you want this. Plant protein, good. Meat protein, not so much. Okay, so diet and bacteroides, it turns out that the gut bacteria is affected by diet as well, okay? And omnivore meat, dairy, and eggs are worse than a veggie diet for the gut bacteria. There's a study in India where there's different kinds of healthy food. You know, you can eat veggies or you can eat veggies. So rice and refined grains worse than the group studied in India who had more of the healthy veggies. And so whole grains, plant-based vegetarian diet of India gave a better microbiome. So you can even make your healthy food better. And you don't get credit for just changing over to French fries and potato chips as you're avoiding meat. These are some other studies just for interest. They took people and they measured how often they ate fruit or vegetables, but this is mostly fruit. And every time they ate more blueberries, prunes, apples, strawberries, and grapes, they lost more weight. So basically, in this study and several of the others, the more fruit they ate, the more weight they lost compared to people who ate less numbers of fruit per day. And the same thing for veggies. And this is more of the same, fresh fruits and vegetables and change in weight. And for all more fruits and veggies, more weight loss. And the same thing is true for waist circumference. You want a trimmer waist, more fruits and veggies. Beans also, same thing. And also all these things work. The mechanism they work is not only decreased methionine, but the other magical component is something called short chain fatty acids. And we'll talk about that in another lecture. So less, not more, but easier. So an emerging consensus of animal and human data suggests, contrary to long-held popular beliefs, lower protein consumption, especially lower meat, egg, and dairy consumption, is better for health and longevity. Recent human studies have found that lower protein intake is correlated with improved metabolic health and increased longevity, while a high protein intake correlates with increased risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. How can we eat less bad proteins and still enjoy better health than a mix of proteins, less methionine, and less branched chain amino acids? Eat less meat, dairy, and eggs. Eat less sugar, fat, and salt. Eat less junk foods, and eat more fruit, veggies, beans, and whole grains. So it's really simple. It's a long lecture. I hope you'll forgive me for that. But the answer is really simple. There's a lot of new research on this methionine chemical. And it goes along and telling you the same thing that people have been saying for a long time, which is eat a healthy diet, it's good for you. So our recommendation is eat a healthy diet, it's good for you. And we'll hopefully see you again soon.